much. Oh, thank you very much, Amy. Good to see everybody and welcome. And as well as early Shabbat Shalom, this is a good time to say Chodesh Tov, since right now we're just beginning the month of Elul, which is our run-up to the High Holy Days. And I suppose it's a good time to say we do have a class that I've helped create with my Jewish Learning to support people in their spiritual preparation for the days of awe. So you don't get to Rosh Hashanah and think, oh, I was supposed to do all this like good New Year's resolution setting. I have no idea what's going on. Sorry, people trying to call me. So this week's Parsha, we're now in the middle of the book of Deuteronomy, Devarim, the final book of the Torah. And this week's Parsha is called Shoftim, which means judges. And as I like to do, I'm going to ask folks to put in the chat anything they know about what's in this Parsha, so we can just get an overview before we dive into some specifics. Right, it starts with the appointment of judges and justice shall you pursue. Very good, excellent. Just give it a couple of minutes for folks to chime in. Right, importance of impartial judging, rules for a king. So people are told they are allowed to set up a king, but they should be careful who the king is and how the king behaves. Good. Well, I'll add a few things. Yeah, it's got a lot about governance in general, right? Prophets, and what are legitimate forms of authority and what are illegitimate forms of authority, including, don't try worshipping just whatever you want, and don't engage in practices of divination. The Parsha also mentions cities of refuge. We've had this idea before, but it comes back again. This meaning places where if there's been an accidental killing, a manslaughter, the manslaughterer can flee to, so as not to get into a blood feud. And it finishes also with this strange case of what to do with an unidentified body that is found outside of a habitation, sort of a body that's found in no man's land. What to do when you're really not sure what's going on, who this is, but there's a feeling of something needs to be done to expiate or to sort of balance this out and to neutralize the circumstance. Okay, so that's an overview of the Parsha. Mara, I sent you a source sheet. Can you put that up could you put it in the chat and put it up in the in our shared screen as well, please? Yeah, we did just have the festival calendar one. Yeah. Great. So you'll see in the chat that there is a link to a source sheet, and we'll just start at the beginning. Oh, let's start with a bracha. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, source of the universe, source of divine intelligence, that makes us holy through this practice of getting deep with words of Torah. May this Torah nourish us and flow through us to our students and our children and their students and their children, and an endless ripple effect of study, connection, not just with the past, but with the source of divine intelligence itself. Blessed are you, great teacher, who teaches people Israel through Torah. Baruch Ata Adonai Hamelamed Torah L'Amo Israel. So here we begin. As folks mentioned, this is the very opening of the Parsha. Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha. You should appoint for yourself, singular, judges and officers in all of your gates, literally, meaning in all of your settlements, which the Lord God will give you, and they will judge the people with righteous judgment. And then I skipped a verse, we'll come back to it later. Then we have this famous line, Tzedek, Tzedek, Tirdof. Justice, justice shall you pursue. Now, as folks have mentioned, this is really the parsha which has the most focus, as sort of the thematic connection between lots of different parts of the Torah of this parsha is justice systems, different ways of forming order in the community. But it's not the first time, actually. It's according to the rabbis, you might know this. There's this idea that that all of humanity, this comes up in the Talmud, a few places. There's this idea that all of humanity are commanded to keep 7 laws. We're commanded to keep 613, and this is sometimes used as one of the reasons that if someone wants to convert to Judaism, they're discouraged. It's like you only have to keep 7 laws, and you're on the right side of morality if you're not Jewish. But if you are Jewish, you're taking on a whole lot more. So these are sometimes known as the 7 Noachide laws, or the 7 laws of Bnei Noach. The idea being we're all the descendants of Noah after the flood. So all of humanity, post-flood humanity, are bound by these rules, and they are, in short, to have a justice system, to not to curse God. It says literally blessing God, blessing of God. So that's usually interpreted as meaning not to curse God, because they have this sort of euphemism thing going on. No idolatry, no inappropriate sexual relations such as incest, no spilling of blood. This is usually interpreted as meaning murder. No robbery, or this could mean kidnapping. Some people say that thieving means thieving of human beings, and not eating the limb of a living animal. Interesting collection, right? So let's just pause there for a second. What do you think of these 7 rules? And to you, what does it mean to not to establish judges, but for the judges to judge the people justly, which is the opening instruction? What does it mean to have justice? Nothing explicit is said about premarital teen sex. Technically, according to the Torah, if the people could get married, then the problem is that they are de facto married, which may not be what they really, you would need a divorce. But if you wanted to move on to someone else. Okay, so fairness. Justice limits basic instincts, try to be objective in judging. Restoration, I assume you mean like a restorative process. Right? Someone chimes in that they've heard this idea of like, don't take on 604 additional commandments, 606. Right. We need to have some kind of system that makes sense, otherwise things will be chaotic and all over the place. Someone points out the only thing which seems to be an active command, like a do, is to create justice system. All the others are not to do's, unless we interpret blessing of God as actually blessing God rather than not cursing God. But yes, good. Good. It seems that Torah ties justice to thriving. Instead of being solely a normative statement, it seems more reflective of how the world works. So if you have a justice system, it will create a world of thriving. Injustice gums up the world, so to speak. Nicely put. No bribes, no preference. Yeah, in the biblical system, sex is one way. Well, actually, in the rabbinic system too, sex is one way to conduct a marriage. Yeah. And a few people have said, what about speaking rightly and not gossiping? Yeah, there's a lot more that this could say that it doesn't get into. A system where there is law and order and the punishment fits the crime. Good. Well, we're going to discuss precisely that rather more. It seems, what does it mean not to eat the limb of an animal? Yeah, like literally, I think it's like not eating something from an animal that's still alive. A very interesting, it's the one that people always remember, right, from this list, because it's kind of out there. I don't know if this was a problem. I had a short conversation the other day with people who were like, what if it's a regenerative animal? Like, could you eat like a half a worm? If it's not doing the animal any harm to have lost this limb? Anyway, that's a whole nother class for another day. This Parsha is one Parsha where we do get instructions about the death penalty. It's not the first place, you can keep scrolling, Mara. It's not the first or the only place in Torah that we get an instruction about the death penalty, namely that if someone kills someone, they should be killed in turn. Yeah, it's pretty rough. Oh, you're talking about the limb of the living. Yes, that's also rough. Also this idea that you need direct eyewitnesses and you need multiple eyewitnesses that can confirm each other's testimony. We should note that not everywhere in the Torah that talks about the death penalty is talking about the death penalty as a punishment for murder, to your point about the punishment fitting the crime. And in fact, elsewhere, and indeed in this parsha, we have instructions to kill people for doing things we definitely wouldn't think were capital crimes, such as gathering, for publicly breaking Shabbat, for worshipping the moon, for blaspheming. It may not accord with our sense of ethics or what's appropriate, and I'm sure folks can come up with justifications for why they feel that is appropriate. I think, in general, most of us would not feel comfortable with the idea that people should be executed for discussing God in the wrong way or worshipping in the wrong way. If it doesn't do a direct harm to another human being, it's hard to even justify this. However, there's something in particular in this parsha about the death penalty. And I'll say as a disclaimer, I think it's fairly obvious from the sources I've brought and the way I'm presenting this, I don't think the death penalty is a good idea. I don't think it's moral or just. I think there are too many problems with it. And you are welcome to disagree, and there's space for that. But what interested me in particular, and Mara, could you scroll down a little bit, is this particular instruction that comes from this parsha. We're looking at source number 8, where it says, "Let the hands of the witnesses be the first to put the condemned to death, followed by the hands of the rest of the people." So those who are involved in convicting someone need to be willing to directly participate in the execution. Now, obviously, in our times, we wouldn't see this in a hyper literal way. However, this put me. This sparked my thinking, particularly in light of something I learned in relation to the recent sentencing of the guy who committed mass murder at the synagogue in Pittsburgh a few years ago, Tree of Life. Namely, that in jury selection, you have in a case where the death penalty is a possibility, everyone on the jury has to be willing to, in principle, give the death penalty. So you can't get to the end of the trial and say, well, I think the guy's guilty, but I'm not going to say he's guilty, because if I say he's guilty, then they'll kill him, and I am morally opposed to that. So they avoid that circumstance by, in jury selection, asking people explicitly and screening out anyone who wouldn't give the death penalty. Now, I think this is pretty interesting, sort of in general, as a moral issue. But in particular, I heard listening to Cantor Michael Zussman, who's the leader of a group called L'Chaim, Jews Against the Death Penalty. He's someone who works closely both in advocacy and also in direct support of prisoners on death row. And he and L'Chaim, Jews Against the Death Penalty, were interviewed on Democracy Now! To discuss this. And one of the things that I learned from listening to that interview was that Jews, alongside Catholics and Black Americans, are statistically the least likely to be okay with giving the death penalty. So they would be most likely to be debarred from this jury. So interestingly, paradoxical as it might seem, with an anti-Semitic hate crime, mass murder in a synagogue, and sorry, I know this is a very distressing topic, it would be statistically less likely that a jury, all of Jews, would convict this guy if they and sentence him to death, which I think is pretty interesting. So I'm curious what folks here think about that, and in particular, why do you think that Jews and Catholics and Black Americans might be more opposed to the death penalty than other groups within the population? Right. We're going to not get into the limb of the living animal today because we could spend the whole time talking about it. I will bear it in mind that maybe we'll discuss it another time. Yeah, the death penalty is applied in a racist manner. Also, we'll look at that a little bit, God willing. So somebody says, why should someone who's done terrible things, such as this nurse in the UK who's just been convicted of killing babies and trying to kill more, why should someone who's done such terrible things, or someone who's shot up a synagogue or a grocery store or a nightclub, why should they live? So I wonder what folks think about that. Yeah, so folks have said, we don't really support the death penalty because we've seen death has been used to terrorize our communities, whether in the case of Jews thinking about the Holocaust, or in the case of Black Americans thinking about lynchings. And yeah, personal experiences of the justice system being used against us or not advocating in our favor. And we've been subject historically as groups to injustice and wrongful application of the death penalty. Okay, and Gail says each of these groups potentially for a different reason, not necessarily a commonality. Yeah. And someone says, because the death penalty is a crime. So, and somebody else says, but what about what it says in Leviticus? And also says here, by the way, eye for an eye, life for a life. And it actually says it near the beginning of Genesis, that someone who commits a murder should be killed in turn. It seems that the Bible is like pretty okay, or not just okay, but like actively advocating for a sort of direct compensation in this way. Someone else says, so but what's gained by killing this person? Yes, they could die, but what would be gained by that? Someone else says maybe they could be rehabilitated. And someone says it's not up to us who decides who lives and who doesn't. That is beyond our pay grade as human beings. Someone else says lifelong jail sentences arguably are actually a lot worse than one might think, than the mercy of just being killed, although often people are in jail for many, many years, and that, it can also happen that people even if you think that the death penalty is okay, that the manner in which they are killed is inhumane, or they're repeatedly slated for execution and then reprieved at the last minute. I was reading in the article from L'chaim that I have linked to below from the Times of Israel about a guy who's 9 times being, slated for execution and to die the next day, and at the last minute has had, or even on that day, has had a reprieve. Which, whether or not the guy's innocent or guilty, and they think he's innocent, he says he's innocent, is psychological torture. That is extremely inhumane to put someone through that sort of thing. So you could say lifelong imprisonment is more inhumane or less inhumane. But in any case, there is there's this issue of, is this vengeful in a way? Is this us sort of trying to get our own back on a perpetrator, and is that kosher? And the general sense of, like, we're not God. We can't know. We have our biases, and even if we do know, as is the case with the guy, the shooter from the Tree of Life, it may be just beyond our beyond our pay grade. That's the word that's coming to me. So, yeah, legalized murder. Yeah, there are many good comments in the chat here. I recommend that anyone who's able to see a screen does read them. I'm reading them aloud because the chat doesn't show up on the recording when we put this up on YouTube. However, let's scroll down a little bit. One thing I think is worth noticing, with these concerns about murder, is it murder in and of itself to execute someone? So usually we have, I think, because it's so much the water we swim in, we tend to see it as being categorically different from murder when the state executes someone, or when in other ways there are these sort of impersonalized forms of violence like war. We don't hold that soldiers are committing murder, even if they kill civilians, which they're not supposed to. But I think that may be partly just our sort of political bias, and I think it's worth discussing what the early 20th century sociologist Max Weber says. He says that the state is davka, like precisely what makes a state is that it has the legitimate monopoly on the legitimate use of physical force or violence within a given territory. That is to say, we recognize, and talking about the police is another thing we could get into, but we recognize, let's just say, that the police have the right to arrest someone and hold them, tie them up and hold them against their will. We don't think that anybody else has any legitimate basis to do that. And along similar lines, that's why we have this idea that state actors like executioners or armies can kill someone without it being murder. What the encyclopedia here points out is, it doesn't mean that the state is the only people, like the agents of the state are the only ones to be enacting violence. What it means is they're the only ones who when they do it, we don't see them as committing a crime. This is obviously, it doesn't mean that the state doesn't commit any crimes. Keep scrolling for us, please. Now, counter to these texts, scroll a teeny bit more so we can see the questions as well. That's great. So counter to these texts from the Torah, which we should remember has material in it that's about 3,000 years old, so a Bronze Age legal document. The rabbis of the Mishnah and the Talmud were much more uncomfortable with the death penalty. And in fact, this is one of the most famous statements about the death penalty. You may have come across it before, where the rabbis say a Sanhedrin, which is like the highest court, that a A Sanhedrin that that kills one person in 7 years is called a bloodthirsty court, or actually it's called culpable court. And then Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says that if it kills someone once in 70 years, it should be considered that. And then Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva say, if we were on the Sanhedrin, we would never kill anyone. And then Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, who's kind of the presiding authority, it should be noted, says that would increase murderers within the Jewish people. So there's a lot here. What do you think is going on here? Why did Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva say they would never have executed anyone? And also, what is the reasoning of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel when he says that not having the death penalty would increase murderers among the Jewish people? Is the only way to interpret that the death penalty is an effective deterrent? I'm giving it opportunity, for folks to chime in here. There's so much good stuff here. I wish I could read out everything that's being said in the chat. I highly recommend, if you're at the screen, to read it. Okay, so someone says they disagree with Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. The certainty of punishment is more of a deterrent than the severity of it. Okay. He may be saying it's an effective cleansing, like this is how you actually remove murderers from society, rather than an effective deterrent. And of course, they didn't have we think of prison as being universal. They didn't have something like prison. First chimes in and says death penalty has never been proven to be an effective deterrent. Yeah. Good. So Robin says, if the Sanhedrin represents everyone, then everyone is responsible for murder. And the same could be said in our civilization. If we don't effectively end the death penalty, or for that matter, I'm sorry to say, our tax dollars are being used to kill innocent people every single day, large numbers of them. Are we actually complicit in allowing our state to perpetrate violence on our behalf? I heard this on the news. I didn't check about why African Americans, Catholics, and Jews. I don't know what the source is for that. I just thought it was interesting when I heard it on the news discussing the jury selection for the Tree of Life case. So many folks, and it's done in our name. If we are Americans or legal residents of America or choosing to live in America. Yep. So one of the classic problems with the death penalty is that you might end up condemning an innocent person. And Maimonides, one of the greatest legal authorities of the Middle Ages, says it's preferable and more proper that even 1,000 guilty people be set free than to someday execute even one innocent person, which obviously is a very extreme statement, and he's deliberately making it in an extreme fashion. And we could debate whether it's really okay to let 1,000 people who are genuine menace to society back out into the general pool. But what he's saying is very strong, that there is a huge risk. If you're going to say that the state has the right, or the Sanhedrin, or whoever has the right to kill people, you have to be absolutely 100% sure that that the person is guilty. And this is very hard. There's a source I didn't bring, which basically says, even if the eyewitness, or eyewitnesses saw someone standing with a bloodied sword over the body of someone who's just been stabbed, that's still, even if they saw them chasing them into a space with their sword, and then they came in a minute later and the guy's been stabbed and the guy's holding a sword, which is assuming these guys, whatever the people, that's not enough evidence. That's still circumstantial evidence. It's pretty strong circumstantial evidence, but they say absolutely not. And one reason is it's a slippery slope. If you start letting this kind of circumstantial evidence in, you're going to end up letting evidence that's more and more circumstantial in, and that's a real problem. Now, as we know, we talked about tzedek tirdof, and the verse in between that we didn't read, but it's somewhere slightly further down on this sheet, is that you shall not judge unfairly. You shall show no partiality. You shall not take bribes, for bribes blind the eyes of the discerning and upset the plea of the just. That's the second verse of the Parshat. Now, it talks there about money and bribes, but we know that money is not the only way that impartiality gets knocked off course. That in fact people have all sorts of biases, and many people have been putting into the chat, and thank you for doing so, quite how unjust the criminal punishment system is in this country, not only in this country, but definitely in an extreme way in this country, where poor people who can't afford legal defense are routinely convicted of crimes they didn't commit, and where there is very, very well-documented excessive use of punishment and force against people of color. You may have seen the film Just Mercy, which is about the long fight for justice for a particular individual who was condemned to death despite the fact that he had a rock solid alibi, and that other people had admitted to committing the crime, or knowing it was very clearly just finding some black guy and saying he did it, and it took many years to get him off death row, get him released. And it's also about the beginning of who did so. There's a guy named Bryan Stevenson, who's a Black American from the North, who decided to make his career in the southern states, specifically opposing the death penalty and defending people wrongfully convicted or over sentenced. And you can check out his organization, the Equal Justice Initiative, which does amazing, amazing work. He wrote this memoir called Just Mercy that was made into a movie you might have seen. And one of the things he says is that his view, he says that the history of slavery and lynchings has left, in particular the southern states, but America in general, with this sense of control, of legitimated control over Black bodies, and also this deep conditioning that many, many white people who don't consider themselves racist per se, nonetheless seem to think that Black people are more dangerous or deserving of punishment, which is not to do with those individuals, but rather to do with the entire social conditions that we're living within. Bryan Stevenson, along with the ACLU, also says we don't have this moral right to kill people, whatever they may have done. There is still murder when the state kills someone. The ACLU says here, you see it in the middle of Source 18, we believe that the state should not give itself the right to kill human beings, especially when it kills with premeditation and ceremony in the name of the law or in the name of its people, and when it does so in an arbitrary and discriminatory fashion. So this is really like we're doing a lightning tour through some of these issues. And here are some of the statistics, and there are many, about the unequal application of punitive consequence in this country. Keep scrolling. It's not that the color makes you more dangerous, it's that people's ideation makes them more prejudiced. Let's keep going. We already sort of touched on these things. So I do want to there's a question about whether the death penalty is an effective deterrent. Some say yes, but many say no. So all of this about the let's keep this source 25. This is from the L'chaim article in the Times of Israel that I mentioned. So all of this about wrongful conviction isn't really the issue here with the Tree of Life shooter, since there were multiple surviving eyewitnesses. It was definitely this guy. Seems pretty clear. So then the question is, well, what did you think when we were 100% sure that the guy did it? And especially when it's a really extreme case, like hate crimes, mass murder, or we might say this nurse with the killing of the babies. What do we think as Jews about such extreme crimes? Do they merit the death penalty? And of course, many Jews, even more opinions. We're definitely not all going to agree. However, I think what is said here in this article is pretty interesting, where they bring specifically the Holocaust and the response of the Jewish state, the state of Israel, to Eichmann. This is in the wake of the Eichmann trial, part of what's being referenced here. So I'm sorry, we just have so little time. It's hard to get people to actually speak live, but please put what you want to say a little bit into the chat. So this is what this article says. Still, what about the worst of the worst if offended? Paradoxically, the shadow of the Holocaust itself can help dispel any lingering doubts on this issue. One thing they raise is the main form of execution used in the United States, namely lethal injection, is a direct Nazi legacy. Lethal injection, which would be used on this guy they're talking about, Rich, was first implemented in the Third Reich and used to kill people who were deemed unworthy of life. And if that were not enough, Zyklon B, which was used in the gas chambers, is also used. So I think there's a sort of like aesthetic squeamishness here. I'm not really sure as a moral argument that this has legs, but like as Jews, this takes us right back to where these methods of killing come from and how uncomfortable we are with this. But then they quote also that many major Jewish thinkers at the time of the Eichmann trial and his conviction, this was the only person that the state of Israel has legally given the death penalty to. Luminaries such as Martin Buber, Gershom Scholem, and many others grasped the danger of giving the state the power to kill its prisoners long before I was born, when they opposed Israel's 1962 execution of Nazi perpetrator Adolf Eichmann. None other than renowned Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel also famously said of capital punishment, "Death is not the answer." Professor Wiesel stated the following, which has become our anthem in L'chaim. "With every cell of my being and with every fiber of my memory, I oppose the death penalty in all its forms. I do not believe any civilized society should be at the service of death. I don't think it's human to become an agent of the angel of death." So we just have 3 minutes. So I just want to give space for people to continue to discuss in the chat. And I wish we were in a room together and had 2 hours and could hear everybody's voice. Someone is talking about cameras being without racial bias, but actually we're seeing more and more that with recognition, like even if you have a photograph of someone, being able to correctly identify who's in the photograph, there is significant evidence of bias. And as more recognition technology is coming on the market, we're seeing that this is disproportionately inaccurate in identifying people of color. I have an interesting, I'm sorry, I'm just selecting things as I see them. Rage and grief are not emotions typically associated with justice, says someone. I can say from experience that executions do not soothe those wounds, it makes them more intense. And someone else says, coming from a post-Me Too perspective, I think that rage can be an integral in understanding that one is deserving of justice, and stigmatizing the emotion isn't helpful. Pretty deep, huh? I would love, Mara, can you save this chat? I really would like to be able to read it in full. I don't know if there's a way to post it and the thing. I just want to say in conclusion that, as I mentioned before, this line, an eye for an eye, is also found in this parsha, which we might think is a terrible way of going about justice in general. And it's attributed to Gandhi. It may not actually be something he said. People say it's something he said, but there's no written record of it. He famously said, or someone famously said, that an eye for an eye will leave the whole world blind. And that personally is close to my opinion, that when justice has any quality of retribution, it's actually getting in the way of true justice, which is to increase safety and fairness for all in society. I'm glad. Yeah, I hope the chat could be posted in the YouTube channel, but I don't know actually if that's possible or how to share that. There's so much we could get into, and this is challenging. And I know I've presented, really just one side, which is the side that I think. So I thank you for being with me to dive into this knotty problem and painful discussion, especially at an early hour in the morning. But I hope that this discussion and the sources have been stimulating, and maybe you'll get to discuss this more over Shabbat and during this month of Elul, as we're considering how to get ourselves right with ourselves and with God and with society as a whole. May this be an impetus for all of us to live more just lives. Tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. Justice is what we're pursuing. And it's great to be with you all. Thank you, Mara, for hosting, and wish you Shabbat Shalom.
Realized I was muted. I said, thank you all. Shabbat Shalom. Bye-bye.
Thank you.